So this week we're going to be looking at George Romero's 1977 movie Martin. It's the story of a young man, or a young-looking man, who appears to be in his early 20s, who goes to stay with his cousin. Both of them believe that Martin is in his 80s and
84, yeah.
is the victim of a family curse of vampirism. And it's about Martin settling into the Pittsburg suburb that his cousin lives in and living life as a lonely vampire there, I guess.
It's the big question of the film, really, isn't it? Whether Martin is a vampire or whether he just has like a vampire fixation and he's just a serial killer.
But it does kind of blur the lines there because Kuda, his cousin, firmly believes and seems to have photo albums and full anecdotes and recollections of the curse going back to the previous century.
Oh, yeah. Apparently there's two other family members out there who are vampires as well.
And they've lived apart for their entire lives, so unless this is some kind of like whole family hysteria that's been going on for decades, then there might be some truth to it.
Yeah, he's fairly convincing, isn't he? But then, Martin isn't your traditional vampire. He's quite, he's not queasy, but he certainly, isn't biting the necks and, doing and he dismisses all the urban legends of garlic and mirrors and having no reflection.
Yeah,
And
walk in sunlight, not
yeah, that's
not
it.
shy of crucifixes or the church.
And I don't think he even has incisors. Like, all of his teeth look really flat, don't they?
But he says himself, it's just a sickness that runs in the family. So
Yeah, but then he seems to confirm that he is 84 years old. So even though he looks young, he thinks he's got all this kind of mileage in, but he still also acts like really young as well.
very, very naive, isn't he?
Mm.
Yeah. I want to get a slight caveat in here before we go any further. Everything that George Romero has ever done has been the subject of a cult following for coming up to 50 years now, and it's been scrutinized and covered and fact-checked, and everything is out there. So
Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
No, it's just that I'm not that keen on making this like a documentary podcast, rather just our impressions of the film, because
Sure.
there are many, many, many podcasts and books. In fact, I found a book on my shelf which I bought and then forgot about, and which would have been great background research.
Oh, wow.
Only this afternoon. But then I thought it's better that this is just our impressions of the film rather than us trying to dig deep into its making, which has been covered many, many places and many times.
So is that a book on the making of Martin?
It's everything. It's thoroughly researched. It's got all the backstory of everyone involved, but it's basically, all the themes and ideas and everything in it are covered.
Oh, okay.
It's really, really good from the skim I gave it this afternoon.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, that's the Midnight Movie Monograph, Martin, by Jez Winship, and it's published by Electric Dream House. I'd highly recommend their monographs on horror movies.
Oh yeah, okay. Let's we'll put a link to it as well. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
I have to say, it's one of those movies. I knew of the title. I'm not a huge Romero fan.
No, me neither.
I liked bits of Monkey Shines and the third zombie film. But yeah, the rest of it I can kind of take or leave.
I came to Night of the Living Dead after obviously I was young, but an entire lifetime of reading about how legendary and earth-shaking it was, and then I watched it at age 20, and it's just like, which I can imagine many people watching films that I think are formative and stunning and groundbreaking because I was there at the time, but
Yeah, sure.
I just watched it and it's just like a bit of a shrug. And I do intend to go back to it. I've bought the Criterion, it's sitting on the shelf. Dawn of the Dead I detested, and I know I'm going to get hate comments for that. I do intend to go back to it now, almost 30 years later. But at the time, it was just kind of a choppy action gore movie with a very, very clunky, subtext that is basically text. It's a satire on consumerism because the zombies are shuffling around a shopping mall like zombie consumers. It's pretty much what on the nose is a phrase coined to describe. I didn't find it that impressive, but I do plan to revisit it. And Martin, for me, is just the sort of small scale oddity that just hits the right notes. It's just perfect for me.
I'd say I was probably a few minutes in before it won me over, because it is clearly a low budget movie.
Mm.
Mostly non-actors, shot on location, and there's some stuff in the opening scenes that doesn't make any sense at all. Like he's preparing his injection sedative for his victim in the toilets on the train when he actually has a really nice secluded cabin that he's not sharing with anyone. So he didn't need to make like the journey to. And I was like, what on earth is this? This is so clunky and amateurish. And then there's that moment where he's picked the lock and he's about to burst in on the woman that he kills straight away at the beginning. And there's just this little fantasy flash in black and white, 16mm, of him imagining the door flying open and she's there waiting for him, open arms, enraptured that the vampire is about to devour her. And you get this kind of elegant music, and it's just a momentary flash, and then it cuts back to him outside the door, imagining that that's what's about to happen. And then he bursts through the door and it doesn't happen, and she's in a face mask and it's really unglamorous and unsexy.
Yeah, she's
and
coming out of the toilet.
Yeah, that's it. Probably hasn't washed her hands, and it's just this sort of like really drawn out, slow murder, and it's really kind of uncomfortable viewing. And I just felt at that moment, I was like, okay, this is like, it's really interesting to de-glamorize the sort of myth of vampirism. I'm not like a big vampire fan either, but I think there's a couple of really great movies about the subject, either like super stylish like the Coppola film, or really kind of raw and unglamorous like Near Dark. I think they're two sort of great examples.
Did you find yourself warming to the kind of the semi-amateur acting? And
yeah, it took me a second, because there is that thing of when you settle in to watch a movie and it's kind of pretty shoddily made, it can be quite frustrating, because at middle age you don't have that much time for bad movies. But very quickly I just felt this kind of the ambition of it. Like they have got limited resources and limited talent in front of the camera, but they're just making the best of it with those resources, and the sort of the ambition and the vision kind of balance it out. And there are some really interesting performances. The I can't remember her name, but the housewife that he has an affair with, she's really kind of
Mrs.
enigmatic.
Santini.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, she's really kind of enigmatic and charismatic and melancholic, and she's I was watching going, who is she? She is incredible. And she never acted again after that. It was just one role. It was very bizarre. So yeah, the film, I think it sort of, I don't know, it gave me one of those vampire hypnosis things where you're just sort of mesmerized by it, in spite of all of its faults, which are on the surface, from like that early sequence on the train. He switches off the light in his carriage. The next shot is a cut, and then it's a shot of him switching off the light in his carriage. He does it twice. So I watched it twice to see if he did do it twice, if there was a second lamp or something. Just such a weird thing just to leave in and not like correct somewhere down the line. But yeah, warts and all.
It'd be good to get into a major topic then, because it's the filmmaking style. Is Romero gets a lot of plaudits because he used to, he edits his own stuff, and people kind of praise the precision of his editing. And I think this is a very good example of a distinct editing style that both works and doesn't work. Like we just described the opening sequence of the film, and that's very heavily edited, and you can see, throughout the film, but particularly here, like his industrial filmmaking background, where you shoot lots and lots of coverage. You get this, and then you get another angle, and then you get this, and you plan your shots in advance, or I'm going to have a close-up going here. And you can see, like, all the kind of extreme close-ups that you're cutting to for his prepping, all the preparation.
Yeah.
And after he's committed the murder, all of the kind of tidying up and getting, all of that stuff's been heavily storyboarded and has been shot that way and then cut that way.
But it elevates it, I think. It stops it from just being another shonky B movie, another shonky gore movie. There's that kind of detail, and maybe it's not even the detail of the filmmaking. I think it's more the fascination with the subject. It feels like it's a bit like Kubrick shooting knobs and dials and just being interested with the technological aspects of the space that the characters live in. I think Romero is definitely into Martin's. I don't even want to call it vampirism. I think it's his psychosis, whatever it is that's happening.
Sorry, I'm just going to backtrack slightly. But it's weird. It's a weird thing to watch because I'm appreciating this technique and I'm really liking it, but at the same time, it's not flowing for me. And there's a few other scenes in this. For example, it's the only victim that Martin actually kind of stakes out and attacks in the film. You know, where the young wife is surprised with her lover.
Oh yeah.
And the whole thing there, you can see it's been very, very much storyboarded. But the cutting doesn't quite work, and it's something to do with the camera, the sort of lack of camera movement as well. It's like every setup is fairly static. I know there's a few shots where you kind of track left to right or right to left, but there's very little actual moving camera, and it's all these kind of carefully boarded, almost kind of static shots, kind of cut together very quickly, and it kind of works on paper, and it does have a way of working when you're watching it, but doesn't really flow in a way that feels...
the best example of bad filmmaking in the film, that sequence, because it goes on and the characters are running it's a bit like a staged farce, you know, with people opening doors and closing windows and running upstairs and downstairs. It just kind of goes on and on and on.
Well, I found it went on. I didn't mind it. I thought the original setup was brilliant, and you know the no, I don't know him, the kind of panic line of the wife to her lover who just thinks they've been surprised by her husband or something.
Exactly, yeah, there's great stuff in it.
It's a great setup, and the actual action is great, but as you say, it goes on. It kind of seems to repeat itself exactly. It seems to do something and then do exactly the same thing for a repeat, and then just kind of winds down. It's carefully filmed, but it's choppily filmed and cut. That it is a bit of a barrage, and it just kind of goes on, as you say, forever.
So what's your take on the character of Martin? Do you think he's a vampire? Do you think he's psychotic? Or do you think the ambiguity of the film leaves it completely open-ended?
I think I think the film leaves it open-ended. I'm one of those people who's happy to just go along with the supernatural read on it and say, yes, he is a vampire. I'm happy to accept, and I'll take, you know, Kuda's backstory for him. I'll take that as real and go with the film like that. As I think I've said before, I have very little patience for those films that demands that something that could be scary is supernatural. They insist on it being ambiguous and there being a real explanation for it. I prefer to go with the supernatural one because it's creepier. So I'm happy to go with Martin actually being a vampire, just being, you know, an unusual vampire without any of the myths or stuff that have been built up around it.
The black and white flashbacks to him in Eastern Europe somewhere, probably Romania, they seem to hint at, you know, him being chased out of the country for being a vampire, hunted down, fleeing overseas, you know, that kind of Dracula myth, the boat to another country.
Even those are left fairly ambiguous though, because all that you learn from them really is that he attacked a young woman and was chased out of town for it. So even that stuff is kind of sitting on the fence a bit, but it's the fact that it's filmed in that 1930s look.
I was just wondering, because the first time they use that technique, it's a fantasy, whether there was a suggestion that these other black and white sequences were also fantasy, but it is all just in his head. He's a fantasist.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. I do very much like the way that the film deglamorizes pretty much everything, but it goes great pains to deglamorize the murders, or certainly the first murder that takes place. You've flagged up that, you know, he comes in and he has this kind of fantasy vision of a woman welcoming him, but she's actually coming out of the toilet. You know, you can hear the toilet flushing in the background.
Yeah,
the face mask on that magically disappears later in the scene.
Yeah, it does.
You've just got to grit your teeth and get past that.
Yeah, there's so many of those little moments where at some point you just have to throw in the towel and say, look, I'm enjoying this enough that I forgive you. But
yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no eroticizing this. It's just she resists, you know, it's not sexualized in any way at all. She kind of strongly resists and call him an asshole, pervert, freak, and
and she kicks back at one point, and you know, this again makes me think that he's not a vampire because she almost overpowers him. You know, vampires are supposed to have like supernatural strength, right? And she's been drugged and she still manages to flip him and pin him down.
And it's the sedatives that he uses are so slow acting that it just means it's a long, long kind of haul until
Yeah,
the
till
person
she,
passes out, and she's cursing him
yeah.
and fighting back. And
And I think she's still conscious when he cuts her wrists as
yeah, that's a
well. But
horrible, horrible
yeah, that's
observation.
yeah, it is. It sort of just creeps you out, just makes your balls go a
Mm.
little bit tight in your guts, doesn't it?
There's some really nice stuff throughout. It's quite carefully written, and there's little kind of moments that kind of knock the floor out from under you throughout. There's a bit during this murder scene where he says, "Oh, don't worry, I'm always very careful with the needles," and she realizes, what do you mean always careful with the
Yeah,
needles? How many times have you done this? And then even when he's kind of stripped her naked and is having sex with her, it's there's nothing kind of voyeuristic at all about it. It feels more like, well, necrophilia, effectively.
yeah, yeah.
And then, interestingly, there's just as much time spent with the cleaning up, and that's covered just as forensically as there was with the preparation. It's not one of those things where it's there to titillate you and then just move on to the next thing. You have to kind of deal with the aftermath in real time.
Yeah, that's the lessons he's learned, isn't it? He says from doing this, we don't know how many people he's killed before we meet him on the train, but yeah, he's definitely well practiced.
And then later on, we just talked about it, but the longer kind of chase around the house with the other housewife and her lover, which kind of drags on and on and on. And I know it's kind of framed as an action sequence, but it's not that exciting a sequence, and it becomes quite a trawl, and it's not an exciting
Yeah, I mean,
anti-hero moment.
I love that he uses his first injection to jab the lover, and then has to wait for that to take effect before he jabs him again to try and render him unconscious. And then isn't there something about him not being able to kill the woman because the man has been there?
Well, no, the thing is that he usually does two things at once with his victims. He'll be able to have sex with them, and he'll be able to drink their blood. But because this guy's here, he can drink his blood, and he won't have to kill the woman. He can just rape her. That for him is a bonus, that he doesn't have to kill her, because he feels quite remorseful in a certain sense for the things that he does, but he doesn't have to kill this woman. So later on in the film, when he's finding himself, sexually satisfied with a fairly normal relationship, he's having trouble picking a victim, because he usually picks his victims on the basis of who he's attracted to. But he doesn't have that sexual hunger anymore, so he can't
Yeah, I
pick a
see.
victim.
I see, I see.
I found it quite gratifying during that during that attack, that whole attack thing. Oh, this woman at least doesn't have to die. She's going to be raped by a murderer, but she doesn't have to die, at least. Slightly going back to the theme of sort of deglamorizing, I find it really, really kind of pleasing throughout the film that things that you think are going to be set up as kind of predictable way are knocked down. Like when Kuda's brought him back home, and he's saying, my granddaughter lives with me. She will talk to you. You will not talk to her, and you automatically think, oh, okay, young, attractive granddaughter. There's going to be some sexual tension. Well, yeah. And then, of course, his granddaughter turns out, and she's just a normal woman who looks like a normal woman. She
Yeah,
just,
thoroughly decent
yeah,
woman, his young woman.
yeah. And then when Mrs. Santini picks him up, and you've had kind of a brief kind of titillating, from Martin's point of view, flash of her in her underwear as she answers the door, and then she takes him for a drive and asks him for something from the glove box, and there's a box of Tampax in there, which it's all these things where things are set up as seductive cliches, but then undermined almost immediately.
You're right, it's toilets, it's menstruation, it's love affairs. The second housewife has got a boyfriend round when her husband's away. And the last kind of set of murders, he's just like killing tramps. Which is it's just it's grim, isn't it?
Yeah, I like the way that the film is extremely fair and even-handed with all its characters. Obviously, Martin's ambiguity throughout. I mean, he's clearly a monster, and what he's been doing for a long, long time is monstrous. And I'm glad by the end that he's dead. But at the same time, he's such a vulnerable, sympathetic man,
Yeah.
and so naive.
I think Kuda asks him if he's an imbecile, doesn't he? I think he's been. Is the backstory something about Martin's mother committing suicide and him being sent to live with Kuda?
I'm not sure. He came from another American city, didn't he? So I think maybe he's just kind of run out of options there, and he's been moved on somewhere.
Yeah, but it's weird that he turns up at his cousin's house, who's this kind of crazy old man dressed in like white suit, white tie, white shirt, white trousers,
Mm.
white shoes, and he was like banging on about Nosferatu and hanging garlic and bells around the house and thrusting crucifixes. And then he's like, "Tomorrow, you come and work in my shop." Like it's not, he's not even locking him up. He's like giving him a job and sending him out in the community to meet young women. And I don't think he's really thought it through. Ending the family curse.
He knows what he's going to do. He just says, "Don't do it in this town, or I'll murder you."
That's true. He said, doesn't he say something like, "First, I'm going to save your soul, and then I'm going to end your
Yeah,
life," or something like
then I
that.
will destroy you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
But even Kudo, who seems like a ridiculous, with his kind of pristine white suit and his superstition, seems like a crazy old man. When you get to see bits of his life, you actually kind of warm to him a little bit. I mean,
Yeah,
this is the thing. He's a horrible person. He's a horrible patriarch, and towards the end, he's pretty despicable when he's talking to Arthur and putting down his own daughter in his conversation with Arthur. But at the same time, you see the little details of his life and see him kind of walking to his shop with somebody else he knows in the neighborhood, and how all the kind of elderly customers coo over him and are slightly in
yeah,
awe of
sure.
him. And then when you see him, having a drink in an old people's drinking hole, um, he kind of is fleshed out quite nicely. He's not the kind of stereotype that you get from the first scenes.
No, but he is still like close-minded old grump at the end of the day, isn't he? Even when
Yeah,
he's talking to the new priest in town and he's talking about demons and family curses, and the priest is like just laughing at him, and he's like, "Don't you believe this?" And he's like, "No, but I know a priest who does." And then the next scene is that priest trying to perform like an exorcism on Martin, isn't it?
mm.
Just that silly old goat just needed his point of view to be reaffirmed by anybody that would, validate it.
I guess we're jumping forward a bit. That was Romero playing the priest
I
he calls
know.
for dinner.
I only got it on second viewing after I'd read the cast, and then I was like, "Wait, which priest was he?" Because he's so good. He's
He's
such
so
a
good,
brilliant actor. Yeah, it was.
and he
I
gives
was like, that
himself
can't
like
be him.
he gives himself an opening line which just nails the character perfectly. It's like, "Oh, would you like was it something like, would you like some coffee, Father? No, but I'd like some more wine." It's like,
Yeah,
oh, this man is a hypocrite. But I really like that exorcism. I get the feeling that Father Howard had just kind of like badgered this older priest to come along and go through the motions just to keep this old man happy because he might contribute something towards the church fund.
it's quite funny. They laugh off the Exorcist as well, don't they?
But yeah, there's moments where Kuda seems, where he's talking about the family curse. He seems, quite sensible and down to earth about it. When he's talking to Christina about it and going through the family albums, he's not ranting and raving. He's just kind of discussing it as if it were quietly discussing parts of the family history.
Yeah, the family shame. Yeah, but then there's nice stuff with her. She's a really nice counterpoint to him because she's seen no evidence of this curse being real. She's running out of patience with her grandfather, and in the end, she leaves. And when she's gone, we see him quite deflated by that. To lose her from his home, I think was quite a big loss for him.
Yeah, I really like Christine Forrest's performance. I mean, generally, the sort of there's something about non-professional actors that I think can give you magical things that you would be very, very hard pressed to get from a professional actor, and even a professional actor trying hard not to act
Yeah, try
as
not to be self-conscious. I think that,
yeah,
yeah,
or
very,
trying to act in a non-actorly way in
yeah, yeah,
in your sort of Cassavetes movies type thing.
yeah.
There's lovely, surprising moments and kind of tones of performance that you can get from a non-professional, which makes over the course of a movie can make it quite surprising and affecting. And I think that's something that Christine Forrest has in this. I mean, I know she's often the character is often overwrought and angry and upset about things throughout, but it's quite a warm, likable performance. For example, when Martin's doing his magic trick at the dinner table,
Yeah.
kind of just her kind of surprised laugh at that is something I don't think you could act. And I really like the fact that we get a character like Christina in this, and she's a normal looking woman. She's in a town with very limited options, Her boyfriend doesn't really like her or respect her or have
Yeah.
much time for her, and it kind of doesn't make her a victim. She kind of manages to leave. I think it's just quite a generous bit of writing. And
Yeah, she has a really nice kind of closing gambit, doesn't she? When she's on her way out, she's like, this. I'm not even going to stay with this guy. He's not the guy for me. We're leaving together, but I don't see a future with him. But what he is a way for me to move to. He's my passport out of this to something else, and then I'll build up from there. She's very like clear-minded. I really like that section of it.
has the legendary Tom Savini as Arthur, and didn't he acted in that biker movie as well, didn't he? Didn't he have one of the lead roles in that Romero biker movie, Night Riders?
I've never seen it. The thing with Ed Harris,
I think so. Yeah,
yeah, they're like a circus troupe, aren't they?
yeah, like an
Who,
Arthurian legends on motorbikes type
right,
of thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
I've seen the trailer.
it's never appealed.
Yeah,
So I guess we could talk about Mrs. Santini, who's never given her first name. She's just Mrs. Santini. Yeah, you said before, it's a really nice kind of, again, that's like a non-professional performance. There's something slightly, she's got kind of a very kind of flat, unseductive effect to her voice.
yeah,
But at the same time, you do warm to her.
and I think there's something about that maybe that this character was very close to her life because she has that kind of melancholic aura about her. She is too young and attractive to be that sad, and there's something about it that just kind of tugs at your heartstrings. She is a good-looking woman, but like with this just deep sadness across her face that she can smile, but she doesn't smile through it. It never sort of shifts from her shoulders.
I think it's quite interesting the way that all the kind of women characters in this are kind of victims. I mean, I know the film goes to great lengths to show how run down that part of Pittsburgh was at the time.
Mm.
It's really kind of post-industrial. Everything's, all the young people have left. It's basically an old people's town.
Yeah,
And I think the plight of the women in this, Christina and Mrs. Santini is kind of tied to that town. It's these kind of young people who are aging too quickly because they're living in these surroundings which have nothing to offer. And
yeah. It's like a cloud of death, isn't it? Slowly draining their life out of them.
Mm.
The vampire metaphor.
And there's kind of a hostility to it as well when Cuda's in the bar and they're he's talking to Arthur and says, if you don't like it, you can leave. So that's the hostility of the old people who that's the feeling of the environment.
Yeah, I mean that's such a classic trope of the kind of those types of people that don't want to embrace change. The misanthropes. It's always love it or leave it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Should we talk a little bit about John Amplas, the lead?
Yeah, sure.
Do you know how he came to be cast as the lead? I couldn't see that he'd done anything really before this.
I think both he and Lincoln, the guy who played Cuda, did local repertory theatre.
Oh, okay.
I think Romero cast from local actors, and I think he had like a network of
Is he from Pittsburgh?
yeah.
Romero. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he started out making films there. I think he set up, I think it was called Latent Image. Again, this is where, documentarians can correct me.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it's a company called Latent Image, which made industrial films. So that was his training. He used to make industrial films for firms in the area, and then pooled his resources, his talent and resources to make Night of the Living Dead, and then made a series of features, kind of non-horror features after that, which kind of bankrupted the company. And then he and Rubenstein, the producer, is it Donald Rubenstein, set up Laurel Productions to make this movie, and then continued working together from that point on. So he kind of knew, I would imagine he knew everyone in terms of acting and filmmaking talent in the area because he'd been working there for a decade.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I read that the location, Cuda's house, is the sound man's house. It's his family home, and his mum, I think, was quite religious, so that all of that kind of iconography around the house and the dolls and things, it was all just his mum's stuff. I read a nice anecdote about Romero, which, like I said, I've never been a fan, but after I read it, I was just like, wow, what a fucking decent bloke. That when Richard Rubenstein was getting the budget together for this, he realized that Romero was in lots of debt to all the investors in all of his previous films.
Mm.
And Rubenstein was like, look, man, this is how you just bankrupt yourself, write off all that debt. You get a fresh start and you'll have some money in your pocket at the end of Martin. And he was like, I can't do that. These people put their faith in me and I respect their investment and I'm going to pay it off. And apparently it took all the way through till, is it Dawn of the Dead or one of the kind of big zombie films where he suddenly made a ton of money.
That would be Dawn of the Dead, yeah.
Yeah, and then paid back all of the people that invested in his early movies. And I was just like, wow.
That's fantastic.
Massive respect for that. Yeah. So, yeah, by the time I got to my second viewing, I had lots of love for Martin and Romero, and yeah,
everything I've read about Romero just says he's an absolute gent. Like
yeah,
right through to the end of his life, he was an absolute lovely guy to meet, full of enthusiasm, always friendly, just an absolute 100% gentleman. So yeah, John Amplis as Martin. He's got a very interesting kind of look. He's got these kind of terrifying pale grey eyes, which if you look at them in isolation, you can easily imagine he's a vampire.
yeah.
But then you see the rest of his face, and he's got kind of this goofy, kind of slightly, forgive me, John Amplis, but slightly bucktooth mouth and kind of prominent lips, and looks like kind of like slightly unformed adolescent.
Yeah, he's really slender, isn't he? And kind of, there's no sort of kind of muscle tone on him at all. He just kind of is there.
I think it's a really nice performance until you get to until the third act where he starts talking to the radio host, and you get those telephone calls can give you an insight into the things that he's thinking and feeling. You're kind of guessing a lot of it all the way through, aren't you? And a lot of it's kind of given with just kind of looks and body language, because again, Martin speaks very little.
Yeah, yeah, and he's kind of less convincing when he's speaking as well. So it's good that he can do most of it in kind of gesture and movement and looks. He's a good kind of physical presence. I love that scene we talked about in the middle of the film with the double murder, which goes on for ages. He is pretty sprightly in those sequences, leaping from room to room, racing up and down the stairs. He's got a nice kind of physicality to him. But I like the stuff with the DJ because it is more direct and it's kind of a Q&A essentially about vampirism seen through Martin's gaze. How he's interpreted the curse.
It gets crazy sometimes. And sometimes I think they're really going to catch me and hurt me or even kill me.
Yeah, I've seen that in the movies. People trying to stop your kind.
You have to really stay calm when that happens. And you just have to remember that the ones that are after you are never calm. People are never calm when they're angry.
No, it's true. It's very true.
For a long time, I didn't care if they'd kill me. Most people spend their lives worrying about dying. For a long time, I wished I would die. Or I wish somebody would kill me. It's been a long time for me. A long time full of crazy people.
I'm always a fan of anything that you can do in writing which allows you to give clear exposition, but in a a subtly disguised way, but just make it as clear as possible. I like the fact that let's say A Quiet Place, like most of the dialogue up front is kind of sign language, which is subtitled, so the subtitles can say very clearly what you need to express without the need for any fancy dialogue or slipping things in. It's just like this, and we need to do this. I'm always a fan of that.
We talked about Tom Savini, but we talked about him as an actor, but not his special effects work.
Yeah, I think this is the film that launched him, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have to say, I quite like the special effects. I thought they seemed, I think we're so accustomed to special effects that you can kind of see it coming when there's a nice kind of static shot on a forearm held perfectly still. You know that something's going to happen. But I liked the I liked the razor blades across the skin and it popping open and the blood coming out. I liked the sort of the mis-scoring where he did it once and it doesn't quite burst,
Yeah.
it does it again. Definitely again has that sort of grounded realism, and it's not kind of cool backlit blood splatters. It's just kind of very matter of fact right up until even Martin's execution at the end is kind of a very dry, brutal slaying.
Yeah, they're quite restrained in this. He's somebody who's famous for not just for Romero films, but for extreme splatter. But yeah, quite subtle. I wasn't too keen on the throat poking. That was the one that felt super fakey for me. And I have to wonder, was it something to do with censorship or ratings that the blood couldn't actually look like blood? Because it's kind of this thick, pale red, syrupy stuff, which would be twice as convincing were you just to darken it a bit more.
Yeah, no, there is something around that period, isn't there? I remember there was something about the blood in Taxi Driver, and that's why they had to tint the final act or the final gunfight, didn't they, to change the colour of it from.
But I remember, but as part of that anecdote, Scorsese was really, really excited because tinting it darker made the blood look darker and more realistic. I think it's just the amount of splatter that was going on in that frightened the censors. So he had to kind of. They thought by darkening it, it would tone it down, but it just made it more realistic. But I'm just wondering why there's this weird sort of colour blindness in so many 70s movies that the blood looks kind of pale. I mean, when I bleed, it's almost black.
I wonder though if it isn't just a quirk of the era that's what blood in films look like. Now we look for something, I guess, more realistic, and I think for an audience at the time that was probably shocking and terrifying, and that they probably couldn't tell it was just VFX. I did have a note actually talking about the gore that this was seized and confiscated in England under the Section 3 of the Obscene Publications Act during the whole kind of video nasty thing in the 80s. So the blood must have been effective.
And maybe it was something specific to the film, that it was more grounded and real, and in a sort of post-Yorkshire Ripper climate, the idea of a young man going from house to house murdering young women might have held more weight with the censors than you would think. I do think the film kind of stumbles quite badly in the third act. I'm not kind of wishing that there would be. It's weird, you think back on it. It's there's only actually one kind of stalking murder in this, whereas you think of it as more because he's a serial murderer, and you think that's what happens in the film. But there does seem to be a bit of padding towards the end. The whole scene with him terrorizing Cuda with the dry ice and the vampire's cape and the fake teeth is ridiculous, and it does nothing that he hasn't already done in the first scenes in the film.
Well, the only thing I thought was with that, because I quite like that stuff where he's dressed up as a vampire and he's got his Halloween costume on, and I just felt like he was really goading Cuda, like he'd really had enough of this old man chasing him around the house with garlic and shouting Nosferatu every time he sees him. And I think he was just saying, like, it's a big kind of fuck you, Cuda. But I also thought that was enough to piss Cuda off to kind of hammer a stake through his heart at the end as well. I thought it sort of antagonized him enough. And then there's this whole like massively convoluted climax where he robs a charity shop and sets off the alarm in some panic cleanup, where he's kind of forgotten his earlier lesson of being prepared. And the police are there in an instant to arrest somebody breaking into a charity shop, and then he kind of runs around the corner into a warehouse where there's a drug deal going down, and then there's kind of absolute carnage as everyone's kind of shooting, and the cops are involved, and drug dealers and their suppliers, and Martin's just leaping backwards and forwards like a kind of little skinny toad through it all, and then just kind of bolts for the door at one point. He's definitely good at the sort of running around physical stuff,
and the whole action chase as well. This is where the kind of choppy construction really falls apart for me in this whole sequence, because you really want a bit of moving camera, and you really want to you really want to deviate from your storyboard a little bit. You know, you could hold on a shot a bit longer before cutting to the next one on the board. And because there's very little camera movement, so much of it is just like tripod shot followed by tripod shot, nicely framed and everything.
Yeah, sure.
But tripod shot followed by tripod shot and another, maybe the occasional move from right to left. It just feels really, really choppy and convoluted and doesn't really contribute anything overall.
Yeah, you're definitely right. The flow goes at the end.
I do like the abruptness of the ending, but you know, I would have enjoyed more stuff. Him with Mrs. Santini. One of my main, well, I'll come to it later, but one of my main pleasures of the film is just the kind of slightly tripped out, slightly off kilter feel of just, you know, hanging around in a mid-70s rundown American suburb. That sun-kissed hazy thing with the slightly distorted Fender Rhodes soundtrack and everything. I could kind of live in that space for a long time.
Oh yeah, for me it's all those cars in the background as well, all those beautiful kind of 70s American muscle cars, just all kind of used day to day. They're not show vehicles, they're just kind of rolling around town in like really cool Mustangs and all of that stuff. Yeah, that's the Americana, isn't it?
And yeah, and for me, I could have enjoyed Martin. I really like him when he's doing his deliveries and going from house to house, and you've got all those kind of quirky little suburban gardens and passageways and stuff. I could wander around the town with him for ages, but you know, so it seems a shame that I can see how narratively, you know, he's becoming less focused. You know, his affair with Mrs. Santini is making him less jittery and less focused and less routine driven. So things start to fall apart for him, but at the same time, it doesn't help the film that much. That big clunky action sequence.
I think if it had just been a little bit more justified, you know, you have the kind of the tramps who are probably junkies, you know, maybe casting aspersions on tramps, but you know they're quite close to where the dealers and the suppliers are meeting up. So maybe you know, you could have tied it together a little neater. And this whole thing of the charity shop being like heavily alarmed and the police showing up in an instant and him just being so unprepared for that final murder, those final murders. That for me, I was just like, oh, what a shame he just didn't stop and think that stuff through a little bit better and make it a little bit neater. And it would have been, you know, a very satisfying climax instead of a very sort of, it's kind of just makes your head shake a little bit. You're like, wait, what's going on now? What now? What now? What's happening? That doesn't make any sense. You know, it's a little bit distracting.
So he talks about the. I talked a lot about the editing. Is there anything else that you liked about it, technically speaking?
I mean, I did like some of the. I liked the technique. I liked the most of the edit and the way it was photographed. I didn't mind it being static shots. It did have a kind of, there is something classical about directors that storyboard and shoot to the board. You know, it's that sort of Wells Hitchcock tradition, and it kind of has some of that, you know, where the scenes are that mapped out and precise, and it pays off mostly. I like the score. I like the music. I thought that was
I like the score a lot, yeah.
It's the producer's brother, isn't it? So Richard is the producer and Donald is the composer.
Yeah, I really liked it, and it got very strange. Obviously, you remember the opening music and the kind of Fender Rhodes.
The big theme,
the big theme. But there's some of the stuff later on, particularly during the attack on the woman and her lover, where it gets very, very strange with kind of like slowed down human grunting and stuff, and odd fidgeting background noises and whoops and whistles, and it reminded me a lot. And I wonder if he'd heard it, because this soundtrack did get a commercial release a couple of times over. I wonder if Elliot Goldenthal heard it when he was scoring Drugstore Cowboy.
Oh, okay.
Have you seen that?
Not for a long time. I have seen it, but yeah, not for a long time.
That has a similar sort of like whoops and grunts and stuff going on. Obviously, that's a trippier movie, but yeah.
Yeah, sure.
It's very, very similar. Yeah, I really, really like the soundtrack. I went to see online if you could still get it, but it's out of print on both formats and costs a lot. Maybe you'll get this is supposedly coming out on Blu-ray in this country as Second Sight, I think. They're bringing out a massive, massive definitive 4K box set of Dawn of the Dead with every single iteration and every cut and every extra.
Oh, wow.
But they did promise to do Martin as well, at least on Blu-ray.
Yeah, because we talked about this before we were recording about the formats. I'd found a Blu-ray copy and sent it to you, and you were like, "This is shit. This is cropped. My DVD is better than this. You know, this just looks like an upscale DVD cropped, and they've ruined the composition." And you were right. I did a little side by side and watched it. And I was like, "Yeah, this was definitely shot 4:3. Like,
Yeah,
they weren't planning on cropping it later, and it looks wonderful in 4:3.
it looks really good, doesn't it? It's, particularly in the first part of the film, there's a lot of really nice framing. You know, Martin's walking through Pittsburg with Coot.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And straight away, I sort of longed for a nice restoration, a respectful restoration of the 16mm footage. You know, but you were saying something about it being tied up with an estate.
I don't know. There's for a long time it's been denied a release. Somebody out there who might know better could please tell us.
You should read that book you've got.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know the reason, but it was held up for a long time. Like the last time it got a legit release in America and the UK was around 2003, 2004, which was the Anchor Bay DVD that I've got, which for the time was phenomenal. You know, it was a new transfer. It's got commentary, it's got short documentary bits and pieces, and I've held on to that. But yeah, it's been held up, and I don't know why. Everything else of his has been through sort of multiple iterations.
Do you know anything about the making of, how they kind of got the money together, what the process of the writing?
No, I think what little I know is that Romero wanted to move ahead and make Dawn of the Dead his second kind of Night of the Living Dead movie, but I think Rubenstein was only able to raise a certain amount of money, so they decided to go ahead and do this one.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I
think Rubenstein told everyone the budget was $250,000, $250,000, but I think it was only 100,000. But he said he didn't want people coming up to him saying, "Can you make another movie for 100 grand?" So he told everyone it was 250.
Very, very wise.
Yeah, that's it. Canny. Yeah, I think he is a smart guy, though, Rubenstein. I did a little bit of research on him, and let me see if I get this in the right order. He had looks like a relationship with Stephen King, because he produced Pet Sematary and then
Creepshow as well, I would imagine.
Creepshow, yeah, some stuff with the cinematographer of this was Michael Gornick, and he directed Creepshow 2.
Oh.
He's also the voice of the radio DJ in Martin.
Yeah.
But he shot Dawn and Day of the Dead, but then he directed 4 episodes of Tales from the Crypt, and then ended up producing, with Rubenstein, a TV show called Monsters, which was like an American cult TV show about a family of monsters watching TV every week, and it was an anthology show. And then he co-produced The Stand and The Langoliers, Stephen King adaptations.
Oh my god!
with Rubenstein. But Rubenstein, since 1996, has held the film and TV rights to Dune, and he produced the miniseries Dune and Children of Dune, and still retains the rights to this day. He is credited as the executive producer on Denis Villeneuve's duology that's coming out. So good for him. That's
worked out well.
Yeah, I mean, it must be like 100 years old, but you know, so what? You know, it's his grandchildren's pension.
I like the fact that Gornick went on to a career. You know, he was just like a part of Romero's kind of wider group of people who and he was
like
just
the entourage.
Yeah, his entourage, filmmaking entourage, and he was prior to this, shooting this, he was like a sound engineer or a sound assistant.
Oh yeah, okay. There's something that I've been trying to sort of get my head around that I wanted to talk about, which was one thing I really respected and appreciated about the film was how it kind of had the scope to give me as a member of the audience this kind of really clear picture of a town's community.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't one of these where you have, okay, here's this guy who's going to do this and that, and everybody has a sort of really clearly defined character. I think it was just the sort of authentic eccentricities of real people came across. So I think that's what sort of made it more compelling as a sort of B-movie genre film, was the fact that Martin felt like he was stalking like in a real town and real people, and that's what made his kind of bloodlust and violence more terrifying, was that it felt like he was killing real people, not like supermodels or you know, the cast of Scream or anything like that. It just felt like these were, fuck, he's just killed another person, you know. And I guess I wanted to credit like Romero, not something I'd ever thought about in his work before, the little bit that I've seen, but to be able to paint a portrait of a town, I thought that was actually really quite masterful.
It's interesting there's no young people in the film. I mean, I know Martin is theoretically young. I find that Christina seems to me to be, you know, late 20s, 30.
Sure.
And Arthur the same. But there aren't any young people in this at all. Nobody, you know, no teenagers. I guess there's the kids hassling the housewives outside the supermarket, but there's no young characters. There's no youth in the film at all.
Yeah. But that's not Martin's world, though, is it? Seems like he's perpetually stuck with old people. If he has just come from his mum's, you know, his dying mum's house, she was probably very similar kind of age group. All those old bags that come into Cuda's shop, you know, they're all shouting at Martin, aren't they? You're a goddamn lazy bastard, you know, and all of that stuff. And it is just old people and housewives, isn't it? That's all he kind of all he sees.
It's a really brave choice for a filmmaker, you know, to make a horror movie that doesn't have any kind of young people or young characters for young viewers to identify with. It is just, you know, sticking firmly to this. It's an old town. It's full of old people.
What about vampires? You haven't really spoke about vampires in general. Do you like vampire films? Is that, you know, is it like one of you? Are you a big Twilight guy? Is that kind of your thing?
I really generally don't like vampire films. I don't dislike them, but I can't think of one. And I'm literally kind of like mentally scanning my shelves and going through all the ones that I've seen. I can't think of one that I've actively enjoyed.
Have you seen Near Dark?
Yeah. I don't think it works very well for me.
Lost Boys?
No.
You're one of those Lost Boys. No, I'm not a big fan of it. It's got too much of a reputation now as well, hasn't it? It's like, oh my God, guys, give it a rest.
Yeah. Okay, I understand you were 14 when you saw it, but that doesn't make it good.
Yeah.
We're clutching at straws here.
Yeah, no, I was just trying. I thought you might have one vampire. This is it, isn't it? This is your one vampire film.
No, I've just never warmed to them. I didn't like Coppola's Dracula. This. I guess there must be some movies that have vampire aspects that I like as movies, but they're just there. It's just something that's been around for so long that it's, you know, it's like, I'm beginning to think like the alien from Alien is that way as well. It's been there for so long that it's just, I can't imagine writing either a vampire movie or an alien movie that could be even remotely frightening anymore, because it's just there. It's just a thing.
All right. So then, as a guy that doesn't like vampire films, what do you like about this one?
Well, it's not a vampire film per se. I like it because it's just, I like what sticks in my mind about it, and what, you know, struck me this time as well. This is only like the third time I've seen it in my life. Is just the mood of it, the kind of slightly sun-bleached, slightly hazy, dazed mood that the film has. And it's, you know, Martin has kind of a detached, unreal existence, and that kind of bleeds through into the film and the way that it's made and the way that it's shot. It's, you know, in the same way that Eraserhead evokes a very strong mood immediately that sticks with you. I think this has a similar thing. It's you know, it's very much like a mid-70s mood, but it's something that really I find really evocative and really haunting, and that's the thing that I like about the movie. And there's all the other things that we've talked about that I like about it on examination, but it's that slightly hazy, burnt out feel that it has that I really, really like about it.
So there's something about an insular man dressed in clothes from the 70s haunting suburbia that you can really relate to.
I knew you'd be reductive on it.
Oh, yeah. I was trying to piece it together while we were chatting. I thought it'd be in there somewhere.
That's why I'd recommend it as an interesting kind of unique horror movie experience. I think I can understand why it wasn't. Apparently, it was it played for a year on midnight screenings, and it never quite broke through in the same way that like Eraserhead and certainly Rocky Horror did in the same period. But it was definitely one of those movies that has such a unique atmosphere and slightly exploitative elements that will draw a crowd, but then do something very strange with them. Um, it's definitely got that feel that I really like.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying. But on top of that, I'd say that there's definitely you know, the the energy of the filmmakers out to make a low budget film that's ambitious, that tackles genre and theme, and is cinematic and has a flow and storytelling. There's definitely that. By any means necessary, we'll get this film made, get it finished, get it seen, get it out to an audience. It's going to be gory and challenging, and it's going to upset people in suburbia because it's shot on their doorstep, and it's going to feel real, and potentially Martin's outside of everybody's window just looking in, freaking them out. It definitely has all of that kind of, I don't know, the will of the filmmakers to get it made, which I really loved, and I think like massive respect to them for this, because I didn't feel it in some of those other films. I just felt like they were hodgepodge. But this, yeah, for all of its flaws, it's just a great example of low budget filmmaking.